Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Brooke's voice quiver, a thin thread of sound unraveling in the dim, cold room. "Please let me go, I'm leaving Ridge," she said, her words punctuated by desperate cries. Her wrists ached from being securely restrained with coarse rope that dug into her skin. The air was thick with the aroma of moist wood and something metallic piercing like fear itself. Thomas stood across from her, his silhouette hard against the flickering light of a solitary bulb hanging overhead. His eyes, once warm and comforting, suddenly glinted with something unfamiliar, something that made Brooke's pulse stutter in her chest. She'd known Thomas for years, a buddy from Ridge, a little sleepy town where everyone knew each other's secrets, or so they thought. Ridge was the type of place where time appeared to slow down, where the mountains stood like silent sentinels and the river whispered stories of people who had come and gone. Brooke had grown up there, her life intertwined with the peaceful neighborhoods and familiar rhythms. But she had always wanted to leave, to give up the smothering comfort of familiarity for something bigger, something unfamiliar. She was on the edge of realizing her dream, a suitcase packed, a bus ticket tucked into her pocket, when Thomas knocked at her door, his grin too tight, his speech too urgent. "Come with me," he murmured, his hand holding her arm somewhat too tightly. "There's something you need to see." She hadn't suspected anything at first. Thomas was her friend, the lad who shared his lunch with her in 3rd grade, laughed with her at the village fair, and was as steadfast as the pines that lined the hills. But the journey had become too long, with the roads meandering deeper into the forest, far from the lights of Ridge. When she asked where they were heading, his responses were hazy, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It was too late for her to recognize there was a problem. The car came to a halt in front of an old cabin, partially obscured by overgrown vines, and Thomas had changed. The kid she knew was gone, replaced by someone who moved with icy purpose, tying her hands and leading her inside without saying anything. Brooke's pleas bounced off the cabin walls in the dark light. "Thomas, please," she repeated, her voice cracking. "Whatever it is, you do not have to do it. Just let me go." He didn't respond directly. Instead he paced, his boots scuffing on the aged flooring. "You don't understand," he whispered, to himself more than to her. "You were about to depart. You were going to abandon me." The words struck her like a slap. Leave him. She hadn't considered it that way. To her, leaving Ridge meant pursuing a life outside the town's bounds, not abandoning anyone. But as she gazed at Thomas, she sensed something new, a quiet desperation that had been seething beneath his easy grins all along. How did she miss it? He lingered a bit too long when they said their goodbyes, and his eyes followed her even when he thought she wasn't watching. She no longer saw him as a friend. It was darker, more possessive. "Thomas," she whispered quietly, hoping to reach the kid she once knew. "I was not leaving you. I just need to find my own way. You are aware of this." His pacing came to a halt, and he turned to face her, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You don't understand it, Brooke. You are the only thing that makes this place livable. What's the point without you?" Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream and tell him he was wrong, that she was not responsible for his happiness, but the rope over her wrists and the locked door behind him kept her silent. She needed to be cautious. She needs to survive. The hours went on, each one heavier than the last. Thomas went between speaking to her and to himself, his words a mishmash of apologies and accusations. He told her about his dreams, how he envisioned a life with her, and how he planned to build a house on the outskirts of town where they could live together. He spoke as if it were unavoidable, as if her personal aspirations weren't important. Brooke listened, her mind scrambling for an out. She observed how his hands shook as he spoke, and how his eyes glanced to the windows, as if expecting an interruption. He was unraveling, which gave her a glimmer of hope. If she could keep him chatting and busy, she might be able to escape. As night fell, the hut became colder, with a single bulb producing lengthy shadows that danced across the walls. Thomas had stopped pacing and was now sitting in a decrepit chair, head in his hands. Brooke's wrists burned, but she forced herself to remain calm and think. The ropes were tight but not impossible. She'd been working on them discreetly, twisting her hands when she thought he wasn't watching. The knots were loosening just little, giving her optimism. "Thomas," she murmured, her voice firm despite the panic gripping her chest. "You do not want to do this. You are not this person. Let me go and we'll forget about this." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. For a brief moment, she believed she recognized the old Thomas, who had laughed with her under the summer sky. But then his expression hardened, and he stood, crossing the room in 2 rapid strides. "You don't get to decide that," he continued, his tone low and menacing. "You don't get to leave me." Panic overcame her, but she choked it down. She couldn't show him her dread. "Okay," she replied, her voice quiet and placating. "Okay, Thomas, let us discuss about this. Just untie me, and we can figure it out together." He hesitated, his hand hanging near the ropes. For a second she considered that he might actually do it. But then he shook his head and stepped aside. "No, you'll run. I know you will." The moment passed, and Brooke's heart dropped. She was running out of time. The cabin was remote, far from anyone who could assist. If she does not get out soon, she may not get out at all. As the night progressed, Thomas became more unpredictable. He muttered to himself while pacing, his words a mix of recollections and desires. Brooke took her opportunity. While he was distracted, she worked on the ropes, her fingers aching from tugging and twisting. Finally, one knot gave way to another. Her hands were free, but she kept them still, not daring to move until the appropriate moment. That moment arrived when Thomas turned to face the window, his back to her. Brooke did not hesitate. She lunged toward the door, her heart racing as she struggled with the lock. It clicked open as Thomas swung around, his shout reverberating in her ears. She did not glance back. She raced, her bare feet beating against the chilly ground, and the forest swallowed her whole. The trees were a blur, with branches catching on her clothes as she staggered through the darkness. She had no idea where she was headed, but she knew she needed to keep moving. Behind her, she could hear Thomas's voice yelling her name and his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. He was too close. But Brooke had grown up in the woods. She was aware of their secrets, hidden routes, and locations where the shadows could hide her. She ducked behind a large oak, pressing herself against the rough bark.
Her breathing shallow and ragged. Thomas's steps slowed and eventually came to a halt. She could hear him now, his voice quiet and imploring. "Brooke, come back. I apologize. I didn't mean it." She did not move. She didn't believe his words anymore. The boy she knew had vanished, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. She waited, her heart racing, until his footsteps faded into the distance. Only then did she move, finding her way through the trees, her eyes searching for any sign of a road. Hours passed, or perhaps just minutes, time lost all meaning in the dark. Finally, she noticed the faint gleam of headlights in the distance. A car. She lurched towards it, her legs quivering from tiredness and her voice scratchy as she screamed out. The car paused, and an elderly woman leaned out, her expression filled with concern. "Are you all right?" the woman inquired, already reaching for her phone. Brooke collapsed against the automobile, tears running down her cheeks. "I need help," she said quietly. "Please." The woman spoke without hesitation. She contacted the cops, and soon Brooke was covered in a blanket and seated in the back of a squad car, telling her story. The officers listened, their expressions somber as they made notes. Thomas was discovered hours later, still inside the hut, his eyes lifeless and despondent. He did not resist arrest. Ridge was buzzing with the story for days afterward. People whispered about Thomas, how they'd never guessed, and how quiet he'd always been. Brooke heard the whispers, but did not care. She was over Ridge, with its small-town secrets and oppressive familiarity. She took her suitcase with her bus ticket still tucked inside and fled. The bus rumbled into the mountains, transporting her away from the town that had nearly killed her. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but that was fine. Brooke felt free for the first time in her life, not only from Ridge, but also from the weight of other people's expectations, desires, and dreams. She was now crafting her own story, which no one would take away from her again. "Please let me go, I'm leaving Ridge," Brooke wailed, her voice shaking with dread and sorrow as Thomas tightened his grip on her arm. The night had become heavy, pushing on the windows of the abandoned cottage where he had taken her. The stars outside gleamed dimly, unconcerned about her anguish, and the only sounds inside were her frantic breathing and the echo of her cries bouncing from the wooden walls. Thomas did not respond soon away. His face was pale and almost emaciated, his eyes fierce yet hollow, as if something within him had shattered long before this night. He had once been a guy who aspired to create beauty, whose hands crafted fabrics and garments that inspired wonder. But tonight, his hands were rough, trembling with a weird desperation as he clutched her as if she were the only thing holding him connected to this world. "Don't say his name," Thomas eventually whispered, almost like a wounded animal. His voice cracked beneath the weight of his own anguish. "Ridge will always choose you. Always him, never me." Brooke's tears flowed freely, expressing panic and despair. She'd known Thomas for years, seen him struggle with his inner darkness, and hoped he'd find healing. But this, the act of removing her from her life and bringing her to a place far from safety, was something she could never have predicted. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never intended to hurt you. I never meant for this." Her hands shook as she tried to peel herself free, but Thomas held tighter, as if letting go meant plummeting into an abyss that he couldn't endure. Thomas's lips twisted, a frail attempt at a smile that faded into agony. "Do you think I don't see it? Each time you look at him, he always runs back to you. I am invisible. I am nothing compared to you. But here you're mine. Just for now." The words slammed into Brooke's chest like knives. She could hear the shattering in him, the remnants of a youngster who had once desired affection and longed for attention from a father who was too absorbed by his own desires to fully offer it. But compassion clashed with dread, and her heart beat so hard she felt it would burst. "Thomas, please," she whispered, her tone softening, attempting to reach the part of him that still desired to be loved, the one that had not been swallowed up by bitterness. "This is not the way. You're hurting me. You're hurting yourself." His grasp eased for a little moment. His shoulders fell, as if the weight of the universe had suddenly fallen on him. He turned away, raking a shaky hand through his hair and saying something Brooke couldn't quite understand. She caught fragments, "not good enough, always second," and "why him, never me." Words that indicated the fury boiling inside him. The cottage smelled of old wood and dust, and the air was thick with anxiety. Brooke tried to move closer to the door, her heart pounding with fragile hope. But Thomas noticed, and in a fit of rage, he slammed the door shut, locking it with shaky hands. Brooke witnessed the extent of his despair for the first time when his eyes darted to her, still damp from unshed tears. "You can't leave me too," he said quietly, his voice almost infantile. "Everybody leaves. Caroline left. Dad chose you over Mom. Hope will never adore me. And now you. If you leave, there will be nothing left." The anguish in his words struck a chord with Brooke. She wanted to escape, scream, but another part of her, the motherly, protecting part, felt sorry for the shattered man in front of her. He was dangerous, undoubtedly, but underlying the risk lay a soul so wounded that it could no longer distinguish between love and possession. "I don't want you to be alone," she said quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But this is not love, Thomas. This is painful, and I can't be what you're searching for." Her candor seemed to crush him even further. His hands fell to his sides, trembling fiercely, and his knees buckled beneath him, as if the conflict had sapped all of his strength. He sank on the floor, gripping his head and shaking in a pathetic rhythm. Brooke stood motionless, split between her want to flee and her compassion, which urged her to console him. Minutes went like hours. The silence was broken only by Thomas's muffled cries, the sound of a man stripped of all defenses and drowning in his own grief. Brooke knelt alongside him slowly and gently, keeping a safe distance. "Thomas," she spoke gently, her voice shaking. "You're not invisible. You are important. You always have. But the way you're attempting to grasp onto me is going to ruin you. And it will also ruin me." He raised his face, his eyes hot and raw. There was a glimmer of something there, recognition, perhaps, or the smallest hint of clarity. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. Instead, he sank on her shoulder, his tears pouring through her top. Brooke flinched at first, but then, against all instincts of self-preservation, she embraced him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was mercy. They remained like that for what seemed like an eternity, two damaged souls clinging to each other in the darkness of night. Outside, the moon rose higher, spreading a pale light across the wooden floors. Finally, Thomas pulled away, his face hollow but serene. He looked at her with eyes that appeared to beg for something she couldn't provide. With shaky hands, he grabbed for the key in his pocket and opened the door. "You can go," he said, barely audible. "Go back to Ridge. Return to the life in which I do not exist." Brooke's heart twisted at his words. She got up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked to the door. Her fingers lingered on the handle, and she returned her gaze to him. The damaged man bent on the floor, buried in shadows created by his own actions. "I'll never stop hoping you find peace," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I can't be your peace, Thomas." With that, she strode out into the night, the cold air cutting against her skin while filling her lungs with freedom. She went rapidly, each step taking her farther away from the cabin, the darkness, and the guy who had attempted to hold her hostage, not just physically, but also spiritually. Behind her, Thomas remained silent in the cabin. The walls appeared to shut in, the weight of his actions crushing down till he could barely breathe. He hid his face in his hands, her words torturing him. Brooke will always remember the night as one of terror, anguish, and delicate sympathy. For Thomas, it was the night he understood how deeply his scars controlled him, and how much love turned into desperation could ruin. Even if they continued to breathe, walk, and speak, part of them remained in that cabin forever. Her tears, his grief, and the ghost of what could have been if suffering had not overshadowed love. Brooke walked farther into the night, her steps rapid yet uneven, her thoughts racing with fear and grief. The forest around her whispered with the rustle of leaves, each sound making her flinch, as if Thomas was coming after her. But he did not. The silence behind her was more scary than the footsteps, since it indicated that he had succumbed to despair. She eventually reached the dirt road that went back to the city. Her phone had been seized from her earlier, and for a brief period, she felt the overwhelming powerlessness of being shut off from the outside world. When headlights emerged in the distance, she lurched forward, waving her arms helplessly. The car slowed down, and a kind stranger stopped to assist her. Brooke burst into tears as she climbed into the passenger seat, safe for the first time in hours. The driver inquired gently about where she needed to go, but her weeping drowned out her words. She could only whisper Ridge's name repeatedly, like a prayer. Thomas remained silently in the cabin long after Brooke had left. The echo of the door closing tormented him, a sound more powerful than a hurricane. He repeated her words again and over. "I'll never stop hoping you find peace, but I can't be your peace." Each phrase was like salt rubbed into unhealed wounds. He rose shakily and stumbled towards the small mirror affixed to the wall. The reflection that peered back was nearly unrecognizable, sunken eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, sweat-soaked hair. He leaned forward, pressing his palms against the wooden frame, until his forehead came into contact with the cool glass. "Why can't I be enough?" he muttered, his voice shaking. "Why can't I be loved like they are?" The stillness responded bitterly. He slumped to the floor again, the loneliness in the cabin crushing down like an invisible weight. For the first time in years, he felt absolutely empty. Not angry or desperate, just hollow. Brooke's compassion had touched him, but instead of healing, it made him more aware of the hole within. He knew that love could not be stolen, forced, or held captive in an ancient cottage. It needed to be provided freely. For him, it never was. The night stretched on mercilessly and endlessly. Brooke would return to Ridge, to safety, to arms that yearned for her. Thomas would remain in the darkness, his tears hidden, his regrets louder than any cry. Two lives shattered by anguish, permanently scarred by a night neither could forget.